Shalom Aleichem and welcome to Machan Le'ira online smicha. So much in halacha we find about the milchik food, the fleishik food, make sure how they don't mix kosher, non-kosher, but very little is spoken about the parav, the neutral food. Obviously, the most important part is to make sure that all the ingredients in the parav is kosher. But about the utensils that are used for the parav food, there is basically little discussion how to keep them isolated or separate, because they don't necessarily have to be separate. As we find in Hilchos Basa B'Chala Siman Tzadik Hey, where he discusses what would be the status of a parav food if it's cooked in a fleishik pot or in a milchik pot. Does it render it borderline fleishik or milchik because it was cooked in the pot, depending if it's a ben yoimoy or not ben yoimoy? And in Siman Pei test, he talks about a parav food cooked in the fleishik pot. Would you have to wait 6 hours? Because after fleish you wait 6 hours. But the majority of the opinions, or the typical conversation is, there's milchik, there's fleishik. You have to make sure that they don't mix. But parav is neutral, goes either way. There are two food items that have an exception. And we find that, yes, as I'm soon going to explain, many people are mahadrim mina mahadrim. And many people, meaning those who do that, are taka mahadrim mina mahadrim. And the standard folk doesn't necessarily do it. But it's good to know that there are two neutral parav food items, there are some people who are machmirim alatzmam, they have a designated pot for this food. Even though it's not milchik, it's not fleishik, it's parav. And the two food items are, some people are machmir to have a designated egg pot, and some people are machmir to have a designated fish pot. Let's talk about the egg pot. We know that it says in Shulchan Aruch, different discussions when boiling eggs. There are primarily three issues with boiling eggs. Issue number one is you want to make sure that you're not boiling zugos, even number, and that's a discussion in Yeridei Siman Kuf Tezayin. If zugos is a sakana or not, is it still? The Gemara speaks about it in Masechta Pesachim, and it's a discussion if it still applies. If it's a sakana, if it's something you have to stay away from. Then, and Lupayo, we find that we're not machmir in that, and you could even have an even number appear a number two. Then we have a chumrah to make sure to try to have an odd number for a different reason. In case one of the eggs are found to be inside blood inside. So if you found one that has a blood spot or blood in it, then at least you have a majority, at least you have a roiv that's kosher, so they wouldn't ruin the whole pot. Min b'minoi, even min b'minoi, we paskin that midrabanan we would need shishim. Minatera, it's takabato baroiv, but min b'minoi you would need shishim midrabanan. In this case, you don't have to machmir so much, but there are some are very careful to make sure there's always a roiv, an odd number of kosher ones. So at least as long as there's going to be two kosher ones, there will be mevatel any possible problem. And then the reason why we also see people are not so careful about that is because the halacha of blood spots, blood drops in the egg, is completely different today's days than the original, as it's mentioned in the Gemara and Shulchan Aruch. Because originally the Gemara and Shulchan Aruch were talking about fertilized eggs. Fertilized eggs, a blood spot renders the whole egg treif. Whereas today's eggs are non-fertilized eggs, so that even if there is a blood spot, you only have to remove that area. So it's a much easier case, so people are much more makel. Because of the shylus of whatever could happen when you boil egg, and what you may find later on it's being bloody, So there are some that designate a pot just for eggs. They shouldn't mingle with any other shilas because it's possible to have a shilah. Yet, a lot of people are not machmir because, as I just discussed, it's really overextending the chumras, and they're being worried about what happened, especially today's days when the eggs are non-fertilized. That's about an egg. About the second food item that people are machmir, there are some people are machmir, and that is a fish pot. What's the problem with a fish pot? The problem with a fish pot is slightly different. We're not necessarily worried that you'll find something non-kosher in the fish. Over there, the problem is, what are you gonna? You want to cook yourself some fish. Where are you gonna cook it? If you cook it in a fleshik tam, in a fleshik pot, the Gemara says, and it's actually brought in Shulchan Aruch and Siman Kufta Zayin Yeridea, that eating fish with flesh is a sakana. The Rahman al leads to tzaras, to a sickness, and it's a terrible sakana. Now this is sakana that's even worse than the fish and milk. Fish and cheese is many places can hold that there is no sakana there. But fish and flesh, according to the Gemara, according to Shulchan Aruch, that's a halacha that still applies, and there is a sakana. So because of that sakana, the machlokes achronim is, how far does this sakana go? Does this only go when the fish and flesh are cooked together? And when they're cooked together, then if somebody eats it, it's sakana. Or even if they weren't cooked together, similar to when you cook milchik in a fleshik pot, the fleshik taste comes out into the milk and it makes it usher, maybe the sakana goes through even though there is no meat present. Right now I'm only cooking fish, but the meat flavor from the pot will go into the fish and it will create a sakana. So those who are machmir hold that I have to be machmir even that, and therefore put a designated pot for fish. Most of the consensus of most of the achronim are, most of the poskim are, that you don't have to be machmir, because the sakana only applies when there is fish and flesh cooking together. Not only that, they go a step further, and they say even if you were cooking fish, and while you're cooking fish, real flesh falls on the outside of the pot, and so it's a hot pot, and there's flesh fell on the outside of the hot pot. Still, usually, if this would be milk or isser, we would have possible problems with the food that's cooking here, because maybe the taste transferred through the walls of the pot into the inside. But over here, because it's sakana, the sakana is only applicable when they're actually together. So hayois that it came on the outside of the pot stopped it, and the sakana doesn't transfer in. And most of the poskim, the Pri Megadim says this. Many say it's not an issue. Now, this that we allow you to cook fish in a fleshik pot is not only when the fish is a regular tasting and it's not spicy. This will even apply by a davar charif. Most of the poskim say that even a davar charif, whereas in the issues of basa b'chalav, we say that a davar charif is so potent that it will take out the taste of the pot. But even in this case, by the sakana, even if it's a davar charif to fish, those who are maker will even allow you to do it in a fleshik pot, and we have nothing to worry about. A good example would be if somebody, the achreinim discuss, somebody has chrein, which chrein for itself is a discussion if it's a davar charif or not. But if you have chrein and you're storing it in a fleshik bowl and you leave it there for a very long time, so halachically it might be kavush. So there's a double thing. At what point it becomes kavush, and chrein is, if chrein is a davar charif or not. Nevertheless, if you accept this opinion that no sakana happens unless they're actually cooked together, that chrein that was stored in the fleshik bowl for a long, long time has no worries, and you could have it with fish.